Okay, we're good.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today is Tuesday, October 20th, and we will be doing the Cybersecurity Awareness. Thank everybody for their time today. Today's webinar is being brought to you in part of a webinar series in preparation for our Ohio Business Matchmaker event. This year's Ohio Business Matchmaker is going virtual. Typically, we do have that in April, but as a result of everything that's been going on, we had to postpone it. But we were able to still kick it off and have it virtually. And we will be doing that in November 17th and November 18th. Registration is now open. You can go to ohiobusinessmatchmaker.com and register. The cost is only $35. Again, this Ohio Business Matchmaker is about our 15th year that this event has been in existence. And it's as a result of wonderful partnerships that we have with several different organizations, with the SBA, Small Business Administration, with PTAC, Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, the state Ohio Development Services Agency, the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, and Right Pat. So it's just a wonderful collaboration to be able to assist small businesses in their efforts to do business with the government. Now, my name is Shonda Harris. I am with the Small Business Administration, and I would like to take time to introduce our speaker for today. Again, we will be getting more information about cybersecurity awareness, and our speaker today is Dr. Lauren Wagner. And just a little bit about Dr. Wagner. He is a senior executive of risk and engineering with Central Communication. He has over 42 years of experience in the IT industry and 20 plus years of managing global networks and global security. His specialties include information assurance, information security practices, policy development, risk assessment, risk management, and contract negotiation. Dr. Wagner is also a senior lecturer at the University of Finland, and he holds a doctorate of information assurance from the University of Fairfax. Without further ado, Dr. Wagner, please go ahead.
Thank you, Shonda, and thank you, Sharon. Good morning, everybody. As Shonda said, my name is Lauren Wagner, and I work with Centricom, which is headquartered out of Findlay, Ohio. And we do managed services, managed network services, and managed security services regionally, as well as we have some customers that are global in nature. So we work across the country and across the world to a certain extent. I'm here this morning, as I said, to talk about the cybersecurity, but specifically to talk about CMMC and focusing on CMMC level 1, and then we'll talk a little about going beyond that, but that'd be the main focus for the presentation this morning. With that, let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll start the presentation. While this is coming up, I'm happy to note I see a few familiar names out there. So everybody, welcome, and I hope that that you find a lot of value out of the presentation this morning. So first of all, let's kind of paint the picture of where we're at today and why, to a certain extent, we're even having this conversation. So it's very typical for small businesses, medium businesses, and even some larger ones to think that they're immune to cyber attacks. They don't think that they have anything of interest, and they don't understand why anybody would want to pick on them. But as this quote says, it only takes one attack to bring a business to its knees. And today, increasingly, there's cases of organizations that are down for many days, and in some cases they have results in business failure Some cases it results in bankruptcy. And then in many cases, as we'll talk about here throughout the presentation, it can result in the loss of intellectual property and sensitive information that organization may have, and they may not even realize it or think of it as being sensitive information. But the reality is that manufacturing in particular is one of the hardest hit industries when it comes to cyber attacks. And increasingly those attacks are in the form of ransomware that causes a lot of strife for organizations in terms of ability to restore their systems and backing up and paying ransom, etc. But also what we're seeing is espionage is a big goal for many of these cyber attacks. And as we'll see here shortly, the impact of some of that espionage and the impact on our country. So a lot of this comes down to what we consider basic cyber hygiene. And that is dealing largely with known vulnerabilities that on systems that aren't patched, management of administrative privileges, and to some extent that can just mean that an individual has access to more than they may need on a day-to-day basis within an organization. Their account gets hacked, or they click on a bad link or a file, and then their system gets taken over and uses the advanced privileges that they have for themselves. And while these things are not the whole picture, they're fundamental in basic cybersecurity hygiene. So why is this important? Why are we even talking about this? Well, it's important because this is the entry point. This is where most cyber attacks and ransomware events in particular begin. And a lot of it can be tracked back to what we consider fundamentals for cyber hygiene. And as we're going forward talking about CMMC and the predecessor to some extent of CMMC, this is really what this is fundamentally based on, recognizing that there are certain controls that an organization can put in place, should put in place, that largely can avoid these type of events. So just a few metrics to highlight these areas. 57% of data breaches are attributed to poor patch management. And I can tell you that this has been an issue for nearly 20 years, probably more than 20 years, but I can show you articles that were published in 2003, 2004 that highlight this particular fact alone, that systems are run within organizations that are taking advantage of vulnerabilities in those systems that have been patched sometimes years prior to. And in today's environment with COVID and a lot of people working from home, we have even less control of this, and this is even more of a prevalent situation. 74% of data breaches start with privilege credential abuse. And that's what I mentioned on the previous slide, are people that have privileges that they shouldn't have, into systems that have sensitive information. People are running their computers with privileged accounts and surfing the internet with privileged accounts. So those are just some examples of credential abuse. And then the other part of that is the tendency for people to use the same passwords within their business that they use for personal use, and that's a pretty well documented area. And then this last one, 93% of cloud deployment configuration errors have contributed to more than 200 breaches over the past 2 years. But the issue with configuration errors is gone well beyond that, well before the cloud. So this is a cloud specific issue. And this is something as simple, for example, as an organization's server might be connected to the internet in some fashion, and then may have some privileged accounts that are still enabled in there that came with the system to begin with. A lot of times there's a default backup account, for example, that has enhanced privileges that sometimes left on systems. So just an idea of some of the vulnerabilities in some of the areas when we're talking about cyber hygiene that we're referring to. And I think it went back one too many. Okay, my mistake. So a couple of examples when it comes to, specifically comes to the Department of Defense and their interest and concern in cybersecurity. And this one has to do with an aircraft, the F-35. And as we can see here, China obtained more than 50 terabytes of data from US defense and government networks, along with private contractor, that's spelled contractor data. Included design and technology and what's referred to as Beijing's new stealth jet, the J-20. So you can see the number of networks that they infiltrated, and number of computer and user accounts that were compromised. And then we see the bottom line here that the estimate in this particular case was over $100 million in terms of damages and privileged information that was lost. We'll go on to the next example, and this is China's KJ-600 plane, which is like America's E-2D, and the picture shows a surveillance type airplane that's, in this article claims that, it looks pretty much like it's probably a copy of the US Navy's carrier-launched E-2D Hawkeye surveillance plane. And this is attributed to cyber espionage, both well-known and publicly documented. So we can see some of the concern here, main concerns, and this isn't a result of stealing top secret data. This is a result of stealing information from a lot of different organizations and putting together pieces that by themselves don't necessarily have much meaning, don't have much value in the data, but when it's aggregated and put together, it allows them to see the bigger picture and to put together plans that allow something like this to occur. And these are just two examples, certainly not the only ones. There's plenty of others, and you can do a web search and find a lot of them that fall into this category. So this is a quote by Katie Arrington, and if Katie Arrington is the CISO, the Information Security Officer for the government in the federal acquisition area. And this was at a conference that went on in June 2019. But she says, who's the government? You are when you're the taxpayer. That's your money. That's your data you paid that our adversaries are taking and using it against us. $600 billion a year being expelled by our adversaries. This room should be outraged. Speaking to the room that she was talking to. And besides the tax dollars that are involved, there's a very real probability of losing competitive advantage. The individual companies losing competitive advantage due to the intellectual property, such as trade secrets that they lose. And of course, once a trade secret is revealed, it's no longer a trade secret. So that can be a major loss to an organization. And there's case studies that illustrate examples where some entity has gained privileged information, intellectual property of a business, taking that intellectual property, use it themselves to create, basically the same product and then claim it as their own. And sometimes that's resulted in the company that originally had that intellectual property going out of business because they're not able to compete with a a copy basically of what they're doing, probably selling for a lot less money than what the original developers were selling it for. So let's talk about some of the basics from the government perspective. We have this, it's referred to as NIST Special Publication 800-171. And this particular publication is really a set of controls. It's made up of 110 controls, actually, that's intended to protect what's referred to as controlled unclassified information. Now, again, this isn't information that would be considered secret, top secret, or anything like that. That's why it's called unclassified. But it's sensitive information, and it could have to do with plans of a product, or information around a product, or even project information, design information, that of a component part that, when put together from a lot of different contractors, make up a more complete picture that then can be used, like in the examples that I showed before. So if a manufacturer is part of the Department of Defense or General Services Administration or NASA or other federal or state agencies, then NIST Special Publication 800-171 is a must. And if they're handling confidential unclassified information, it's absolutely a must going forward with CMMC, and we'll talk about that more later here in a little bit. The thing about NIST 800-171 though is it doesn't require certification process. In other words, a company says that they are compliant, that they've implemented these controls, and they sign a document basically saying that they've done this and they're compliant. That's all that's required. Nobody comes in and does an audit or anything else. They're completely on their word that they've done these things, they've implemented these controls, and they're properly protecting the data that they're supposed to be protecting. This particular requirement went into effect December 2017. And subsequently, it's estimated that less than 1% of the more than 300,000 in defense industrial base comply with 800-171. And for the most part, the ones that do comply with it are tier one vendors, tier one organizations like a Lockheed Martin, for example, or a Boeing or something to that effect. There are smaller organizations in the supply chain that I know of that are compliant with 800-171, but they're far and few between. And admittedly, it's a daunting task when you look at a small organization in particular having to implement 110 controls within their organization that today they may not even have password controls, or they may not even have good overall access controls, because that's not the business that they're in. They're in business to sell a product and make money. Security is not on the top of their list. We can argue whether it should be or not, but it's not. And frequently in the small business environment, you don't necessarily even have a full-time IT person, let alone a full-time security person that can help out in this. And this, by the way, is areas where PTAC and the Small Business Administration and MEP, do have resources that can help in this area, help guide you in this area, I should say. But it's still a lot of work, a lot of stuff. And so if you see these advertisements from companies that say they can fix this for you in 30 days, I would be wary. So we'll go beyond the basics and introduce the CMMC. This is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And certification being a key word there. This is a new model. This goes beyond 800-171, which we'll highlight here more in a moment. And this applies to all companies conducting business with the DoD. This could even be a landscaping business that's working on a military base, for example, are going to fall under this at some level. So virtually everybody, every contractor, every subcontractor that's working in the defense industrial supply chain, this applies to them. Unlike 800-171, which was a one-size-fits-all approach, CMMC does allow for a definition of different maturity levels. And they have this defined as basic cybersecurity hygiene to advanced. This was officially released in January of this year, version 1.0. Subsequently, they have a version 1.2. And in the links that I provide in here, all that information is available to you as well. But the key point here is this is a certification process, and it's practically a guaranteed loss of business if certification isn't met. So in other words, where this is heading is that vendors will be providing what level of CMMC certification is required in order to bid on a contract or a component of that contract. And then they will have that as part of their request for proposals as well. So there may be a piece of the contract that requires, say, a level 3 certification, and we'll talk about what that means. And then there could be even more pieces of contracts that require level 1 certifications, and that's probably where most of them will be. It just depends on what the ask is, what the requirements are for the proposal in a bid process. So they have accreditation body. It was also established in January of this year, and they're responsible for setting the standards, processes, and requirements. For assessors, they refer to them as assessors. Others refer to them as auditors. Those are interchangeable in this context. And then they'll have these organizations that are third-party assessment audit organizations, also referred to as C3PAO. That's an acronym for this. Now, it's important to understand that there'll be registered practitioners and registered provider organizations in addition to the assessors and the C3PAO. Assessors and practitioners are mutually exclusive. In other words, as an organization, I can be a registered practitioner and assist you in obtaining CMMC certification, but I can't audit you as well. So the third-party assessment audit organizations are the ones that have individuals working for them that actually do the audits. So that's two different roles, two different functions, and largely two completely different organizations. So here's a breakdown on what the accreditation body looks like and what their areas of responsibility are. So they are an oversight body. They'll do dispute resolution and capture metrics as we go along here. And you'll see going across that bottom set of boxes, on the far left, you have training. And that's for training individuals, organizations, and instructors. You have, they have infrastructure, support systems, be a marketplace, artifact store, records management, knowledge store. And in the marketplace will be where organizations and individuals that have been trained and qualified to do the practitioner role or do the assessment role will be listed in this marketplace and available for everybody to know who has the qualifications and that certification in order to engage them in those functions. Accreditation, they grant accreditations, audit C3PAO, and then they handle complaints. Credentialing, they grant credentials, consultants, and assessors. And they have assessment operations with technical appeals, quality control, assessment tool. So they're intending as well to provide a set of tools that assessors can use in order to audit these organizations for certifications so that they have a common approach, a common body of knowledge. Theoretically anyway, everybody is working towards the same findings, identifying the same controls, and validating those controls, and ultimately consistently providing or not the certification process. So here's some information from their website, and these are PDF files that you can go out and download. But I want to draw your attention to number 4 through number 7. And I know this is a little difficult to read, but this gives you a pretty good idea of where they're at today, and they're basically running about a year behind from where they thought that they would be, but their original timeline was before the pandemic hit. So number 4 talks about provisional program testing the design in the summer and fall of 2020, and this has been done and or in process, and the idea was to engage volunteers that already had audit backgrounds to go into selected organizations, do an audit, compile the data, and bring it all back so that they could do lessons learned and incorporate their learnings in these processes into the training program. Number 5 is training certification, training criteria publication. It's slated for fall of this year. I believe that that's going to the entities that would actually be doing the training. 6 has certified training starting in winter 2020 and 2021. Now, I know that they have started accepting applications from both organizations and individuals to participate, but as yet, the actual training program has not been announced. So until the individuals are trained, there's nobody, no organization or individual that can say that they can provide you absolutely with a CMMC certification, because in fact it doesn't exist yet. And then number 7, ecosystem go live, commercial assessments available, and that's scheduled for the winter and spring of 2021. So it remains to be seen here in the next couple months remaining in this year, with the holidays and all coming upon us, just how far we get on identifying the organizations and providing the organizations themselves with training that then they can then turn around and train others for. This graphic really just shows the entities of a registered, the registered participants, certified assessors, certified professionals, and then certified professional applicants. So this is just giving you an idea of what the entities are that's going to be involved in this, as far as what the typical company would see, either the practitioner, the assessors, or the professional practitioners to assist in becoming certified, and then the assessors that would actually do the certification. So I guess I'd ask at this point, Sharon or Shanna, has there been any questions that might be opportunistic now to address before I go any further?
No, I don't see any at this time.
Okay. All right. So this is the structure for the CMMC model. And as you can see on here, it covers 17 capability domains. The 800-171 had 14 domains with 110 controls. And as you see in a moment, the controls have increased somewhat under CMMC. But these are the main areas: access controls, asset management, awareness and training, audit and accountability, configuration management, identification, authentication, incident response, maintenance, media protection, personnel security, physical protection, recovery, risk management, security assessments, situational awareness, system and communication protection, system and information integration. So that's a lot. That's a lot of areas. And many of these areas you may already be doing things in. You may already have controls in place around these and just not identified, not broken down into these particular boxes. But these are the areas that are involved in the complete CMMC model. So when we look at it from a numbers perspective, practices per level, we see the level 1 has 17 practices, and we'll look at these in depth. Level 2 is considered an intermediate cyber hygiene, has 72 practices. Level 3 is the area that many will be interested in, level 1 and level 3. And you see that has 130 practices. So this is the equivalent at this point of 800-171 of level 3. But instead of 110 practices or controls, there's 130. So they've added a few in the CMMC model. Then we have level 4, considered proactive, 156 practices, and level 5 is 171, advanced and aggressive. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is that level 4 and level 5 is most likely going to impact tier 1 DoD contractors and suppliers. A very small percentage of organizations will have to deal with level 4 and level 5. So here's another view. It gives just a little bit more information. But if you see level 1 there, it has 80% by it. This is kind of the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, but it is considered that 80% of the organizations that work as in the defense industrial base will fall into this level 1. Now, as you learn as we go along here farther, this refers to level 1 as basic cyber hygiene. It's important to understand, and I'm going to give a definition here in a moment of what FCI is and what CUI is. But FCI is federal contract information. So fundamentally, this is really saying this represents basic cyber hygiene for the protection of federal contractor information, contract information. If we go by the check the box compliance approach that's often followed, doing this level 1, just these 17 controls would not pass you for what is normally considered from a security perspective, basic cyber hygiene, because there's just a few things that's missing from that, and we'll talk about that more later. Let's see, level 2 includes documentation. Level 1 says performed, and we'll break that out more. But the idea there is that you're doing these things, but you don't necessarily have them documented that you're doing these things. So if they were to come in and audit, they can't say, well, show me the paper, show me the documentation, because it's presumed not to exist. What they will expect is you be able to tell them and demonstrate to them what you're doing in order to pass the level 1. And most of this, we've already talked about level 2's transition step to level 3. And then 4 and 5 is increasing cybersecurity controls. And this says here reducing risk of APTs, but APTs, advanced persistent threats, which is true, but some of these other steps prior to that would also help in that particular function. Okay, so these two terms being used throughout this referenced in CMMC, FCI, Federal Contract Information. This is information that's not intended for public release. It's provided within the contracts or under the contracts where it talks about delivering a product or a service. It doesn't really include the information that goes to the general public. So when we talk about level 1 CMMC, the intent is that it's protecting sensitive information that might be contained within these contracts. CUI, on the other hand, is controlled unclassified information, and I've talked about that a little bit already. It's considered sensitive data. It's important data that is intended to be kept private. This gives some examples here of weapons test data or information about military personnel. However, I'm not sure that at a level 3 how much there would be about weapons test data, but it would definitely include the plans around developing the product that you might be providing to the U.S. government or DoD, or the services, details of the services. And CUI can morph over time. So let's take, for example, a manufacturer is giving design plans for a product, and in the process of developing this product, they somehow enhance it. Well, now that enhancement becomes CUI data, but that's not something that originated from the government. That's originated within the organization, but it still has to be managed as such. So it gets to be a little confusing, and this has been an area of confusion on just exactly what is CUI data when you're given drawings or you're given information or engaged in services with different entities. Technically, if it's CUI data, it's supposed to be labeled as such. I've seen examples where that wasn't the case, and it causes a lot of confusion, especially with small manufacturers. So just keep in mind, there is this archives.gov that provides a list of categories of the information that's considered to be CUI, and that's there for your reference. And then this DFARS regulation that's referenced here, it also has additional information on that. So let's look at these. Let's look at this focusing on level 1. Level 1, as I mentioned, talks about processes performed. It requires an organization perform specified practices, may only be able to perform these practices ad hoc, or may not rely on documentation. Process maturity is not assessed for this particular level. It focuses on the protection of federal contract information and just the practices of safeguarding, basic safeguarding that information. So when this says not maturity is, level 1 maturity is performed. It means that you're doing the things that it says, as I mentioned before, these 17 controls, but they're not necessarily documented. They're not necessarily changed or managed. Definitely they're not optimized. The intention is that the company's implemented these security practices and they can show it, they can demonstrate it, but they don't necessarily have supporting documentation or try to make any improvements around it. This really does reflect where a lot of small business organizations are. There's things that they do, and when you talk to them, they can explain the practices, but they're likely not documented. They probably don't have formal policies and procedures in place, and anything particular in writing around these practices. It's just part of their day-to-day business that they assume in most cases are normal IT practices. So I showed you the CMMC model from the perspective of the whole domain, and that was 17 practices. Level 1 just has 6. So it falls under access controls, identification and authentication, media protection, physical protection, system and communication protection, and system and information integrity. So let's talk about these individually and break these down. Under access controls, it has use passwords and PINs to restrict login. Now, the using passwords is fine. That's one thing, but I've seen a number of organizations that they do use passwords, but their passwords never expire. So that leads to some additional potential vulnerabilities, especially when the assumption largely by the bad guys is that individuals frequently use the same password for multiple purposes and may use the same password for their banking account that they use in their work environment. So just a little bit of an FYI, using passwords is correct, but there's also some logic around how the passwords are used and restricted. Assign user rights to most accounts. So this means that not only are people given accounts and people have passwords and they're required to manage those passwords and change them on occasion, they also have passwords that only allow them access to what they need to do their job. So if I'm not a payroll processor, there's no reason that my account should have access to payroll, for example. Number 3, don't share your neighbor's network. There's some places where small business might work within a building, perhaps that has other occupants within that building that they share the landlord's server for their data and for their small business network. This is saying don't do that. Have your own that you can manage, and you can maintain the integrity of that data and that network yourself, or with the assistance of a third party. Don't share your data with the world. So that's just saying don't expose data to the public internet or sensitive data to the public internet. Have it well protected within your own environment and have appropriate protection so that's not visible to the outside world. Make accounts for each employee. This is becoming less common, but it used to be pretty common that An organization might have an account called payroll, and then multiple employees would use that account in order to manage payroll, rather than have their own individual accounts that ultimately can be logged and tracked if necessary. And then change the default passwords. There was a major data breach by an organization a number of years ago. I believe it was Marriott Resorts, that one of the things that was found that facilitated their data breach is that they had a server that was connected to the public internet and still had the default user codes and passwords on the server that came with it when the operating system was initially installed. So that helped facilitate that data breach. You can go out to Google and just put in default passwords as a search key and see what you get back. And you might be amazed, if you've never done this type of thing, to see that virtually all the default passwords for all types of devices are listed as a result of that search. And of course, if you can see it, certainly the bad guys have access to it too. Media protection. Crush it, shred it, or overwrite it before you trash it. There's numerous cases where somebody has resold a computer, for example, or maybe even just a hard drive out of a computer, and still has the data on it that was being used by the organization. Or, they throw sensitive, even paper, sensitive paper in the trash, and they don't shred it. So the idea is to eliminate that as a possibility. So rather than, provide somebody your business data, your sensitive information, you might even have employee information or customer information. Take care of it beforehand so it won't be an issue. Physical protection says, get away from my computer. So these can be, it's kind of blunt, but the idea is to make sure that there's no unauthorized access to your computer as well. So, and also physical controls around it. So if you're an organization, small organization, you have a server that's running your business, you want to keep that server under lock and key, and only authorized people have physical access to the device. Stop unauthorized people and supervised visitors. So if there's somebody that's in your facility, and a lot of you that are pretty small, you'd probably notice right away if they belong or they don't belong. In a little bit larger organizations, you may have a formal process for people visiting to sign in, and then have a policy around, well, you wouldn't have a policy in this case, a written policy, but at least a verbal policy that visitors are to be supervised and attended while they're on your site. And who was here yesterday? Well, that goes back to the logbook and being able to identify who was there. And in some cases, you might have a camera there as well as a logbook, so you have some other evidence if something were to occur. I'm going to need your key back refers to access controls, access that is returned when an individual is leaving your business. Either they've quit and gone someplace else, or they've been fired, if you will. But making sure that all the access controls, keys, tokens, cell phones, laptops are all properly returned back to the organization. System and communication protection. Keep your computers inside the firewall. So this goes back to a comment I made earlier. Don't expose your data, or certainly any sensitive data to the outside world, and keep it within your own network. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. This pertains largely to people that might work within your organization, say in IT or in security, that have access rights, have admin rights to a large variety, if not all of your systems. And the idea here is that with these privileges, they might be able to access, again, something like your payroll information or customer data. But if it's not part of their job and they don't need to have access, they shouldn't. I mean, it's not a license for them to go roaming around, for example, and trying to see how much money their buddy's making within the organization. That's not authorized behavior, and therefore, they shouldn't be able to do that. System and information integrity, install updates. This is huge. This is a biggie, and I know today we see examples of vulnerabilities within systems and devices all the time, and it can get to be overwhelming. But it is very important, and that doesn't mean that you install an update necessarily every time or at every moment that it comes out. There should be some due diligence. Again, you might need some help from a third party to assess the importance of that vulnerability to your environment. But that shouldn't mean not installing updates for years. That should be a discussion of, weeks or maybe just a few months, but definitely over the long haul, you're better off with the updates installed as soon as you practically, from a business perspective, can do it. Antivirus systems, and then the last one, enabling antivirus scans. Having antivirus systems, one thing. Maintaining the updates and the definition files for them is another. Frequent is better. Subscribe for threat protection. So this is just, in some cases, just services that keep you in the loop on activities that are going on that might have an impact on your business. And then enable antivirus scans. This also includes, This also includes something like plugging a USB into a system, making sure that it gets scanned before it's available. So these are indeed fundamental controls, and you might look at these from your perspective and say it's a little overwhelming. On the other hand, you might look at it and say, hey, we're doing this stuff, or we're doing most of this stuff. So, a few improvements that we could make. But keep in mind that, again, everybody that deals in the industrial or defense supply chain is going to be required to be at least a level 1. Now, today, the situation is where organizations are still required to be 800-171 compliant. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a self-attestment. This is, and if you're managing, especially if you're managing CUI data, it's a requirement for you to be compliant to 800-171, and that is true today. This particular slide refers to a case where an organization said that they were compliant and they weren't, and they had an event occurred that demonstrated that they were not compliant. So this exposes an organization to what's called the False Claims Act liability. And in this particular case, they found that the non-disclosure could be material, because it required to establish liability under False Claims Act, because the government might not have awarded the contracts if it had known the extent of non-compliance. So this is a big deal, and even in today's world, There could be a situation where you're not able to bid on a contract, or you could be found liable or negligent or subject to this False Claims Act liability if claiming that you are compliant and in fact you are not. The last bullet on here, talking about periodic assessments are a must. It's great for an organization to have a cybersecurity risk assessment, and it helps give them a check on a point in time and then put together a plan in order to fill any gaps. But things are changing all the time, and you're in many cases within organizations, their environment is changing as well. You know, maybe new hardware gets installed, maybe something gets replaced, maybe new software gets put in place. Maybe you've hired some new people, which are, you know, can be part of a risk assessment as well. But the requirements call for, by and large, at least an annual risk assessment to be done. And again, with CMMC, you have to assume a minimum of level 1. So we'll talk a little bit here about the other 2 following levels, level 2 and level 3, just to give you an idea of what they're talking about. The level 2 requires an organization to establish the documentation and practices of what comprises their CMMC. The documentation is intended to be able to perform these practices in a repeatable manner, and also that indicates a level of their maturity by having the documentation and then the practice and being able to demonstrate that you're practicing them as documented. And so some of you might be organizations that have ISO quality certifications, and if you've had an audit, an audit within ISO, say 9001, something to that effect, then it's not unusual for them to, you know, sit with you and say, are you doing these certain things that might impact the quality of your product? And you say, oh yeah, of course we're doing those things. Well, then the next step is show me, step me through the process. How is this working? How is this control in place? How is it being effective? And this is the same type of thing that you would expect in these processes. Level 2 is considered intermediate cyber hygiene. It's in between, of course, level 1 and level 3. There's not there. I suppose there could be a requirement in an RFI or an RFP saying you have to be a minimum of level 2, but the idea really is to set this off as an additional chunk for you to work on in order to gravitate to level 3 status. And then level 3 is an absolute if you're managing controlled unclassified information. In this case, you have to establish, maintain, and resource a plan demonstrating the management activities for practice implementation. It says it may include, I would say it most likely would include your mission, your goals, your project plans, resourcing, training, and any involvement of relevant stakeholders. This focuses on the protection of CUI and encompasses all the security requirements in NIST SP 800-171. And that footnote there is a footnote within the document that the link goes to down below, which is the CMMC model version 1.02. So level 1 or level 3. You must assume a minimum of level 1 Your customer, whether it's a tier 1, tier 2, will specify in their request for information, request for proposals, the required level for the portion of a project contract that you might be bidding on. As mentioned previously, storing CUI. Actually, this goes beyond storing CUI. This is if you're handling CUI at all. So this includes the receival and transmission of CUI data as well, not just simply storing that. And again, if you're managing CUI data today, you already legally are there. So for reference, this section that I cut into the slide down here, section 1, contract clauses. This is a section out of a purchase order from a manufacturer. Now the really important thing here is that, and unfortunate thing is that it's possible that an organization is signing purchase orders, signing a contract that has this requirement in it. And if you're handling CUI, it does have this clause in it. And the IT or security group may never know it. They may not even realize it because these are purchase orders for product or services that doesn't necessarily involve them directly. And these might have been negotiated and put into place without any part of IT or IT security at all. So think about that. And if you're dealing today with the DoD or any of these other entities this applies to, if you don't know, you might want to take a look at a purchase order that applies to this service or product and verify whether this clause is in there or not. So if this clause is in there, you're managing CUI data, then you're already required to have fully implemented 800-171. And you in effect have signed a contract saying that you are doing that. So just a word of caution there, and I've seen this already with some small businesses that they're not aware of this particular clause and the potential liability that goes along with it. So some next steps. Start with CMMC validation, level 1 validation, and then look at are we doing all of these things that's in level 1. Now, certainly if you're working with CUI data, it has to go beyond level 1, that you have to get to level 3, but you have to start someplace. And so assess where you're at now and see if you're in compliance. And even if you're not doing business with the DoD, because if you're in the automotive industry, the automotive industry has already said that they are on board with 800-171, and it's most likely that they're going to shift over to CMMC. Partially because they have the same problem that exists today, that a lot of small organizations, it's a significant challenge for them to implement all 110 controls. So level 1 provides some breather there for them, assuming it applies to them. Strongly advise third-party assessment. Oh, before I get off of that, I'm sorry. The automotive industry and also the Small Business Administration and Small Business Development organization is in support of CMMC, and they have some information to that effect on their website. So I strongly suggest you take a look at that as well. Strongly advise a third-party assessment assistance. Getting a set of eyes in there that understands what they're looking for and can communicate back to the management team what the gaps are and help build a roadmap, a plan going forward can be vital to your success. because frankly, a lot of small and medium businesses just don't have the resources to do it themselves. Even if they have the knowledge, they don't necessarily have the people or time. Consider ongoing services from a managed security services provider. Some of these controls require to put logging in place and analysis of that logging. And in some cases, you might be familiar with the term SIM or SIEM. And those are product suites that collect the log data and analyze the log data and provide you information, especially information if there's some suspicious activity going on within your network. So this logging component is a required control, especially for 800.171 and then in level 3. And then consider that even though the CMMC level 1 is referred to as a basic cybersecurity control, as I mentioned earlier, it's missing key controls normally considered best practice. For example, training and awareness is not included in level 1, and backup and recovery is not included in level 1. So that's why I say, take it beyond the requirement for federal contract information, because let's face it, if you have a ransomware event, you are likely to be down for hours, perhaps days. That will have a significant impact on your business. And if you're not doing backups appropriately and the ability to recover, it's going to be a hard road, unless of course you find the money and you're willing to pay the ransomware, and that's no guarantee. And also, if you don't have training and awareness in place, you're more likely to have a ransomware event. So those, in my mind, those are definitely best practices that should be included even if you're at a level 1. So with that, that concludes the formal information. There's some resources here. We're happy to make the PDF version of the presentation available to you, so you have access to these resources. There's a little overview of Centricom, and as I mentioned earlier, in cybersecurity and networking, compliance, and then we do risk assessments and we do manage services. We also have a round-the-clock engineering team, a round-the-clock network operations center, and 2 data centers that if you're considering some assistance in your backup processes, we can help with that as well.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
And with that,
and it looks like we do have a couple questions.
Okay.
So someone asked, they work for a small manufacturer and they are currently NIST 800-171 compliant. Would they be required to be certified to level 4 or 5 for CMMC?
I really can't answer that definitively. I'm saying likely not, but that really comes from who they're contracting with. So they are the ones that should be stating what level they require, and of course that certification process doesn't exist yet, so there's not a way to absolutely validate that. What they will have to do though, if they're 800-171 and that's where they should be, then they will have to look at the additional 20 controls that are required for level 3 above and beyond 800-171.
Okay. And then there's a second part to that question. Is the NIST 800-171, does it comply with level 1 through 3 under the CMMC model?
It complies with, well, level 1 would be a sub portion of that, just a small portion of 17 out of 110 controls in 800.171. And then 800.171 would be refer to level 3 plus the additional 20 controls that's the CMMC added.
Okay. Okay, next question, and there, continue to type in your questions. We have a couple more. So how does a small business connect with third parties to at least get level one certification?
Give me a call or send me an email. that would be that would be one approach. That'd be the preferred approach, of course. But there are truthfully there are other organizations out there that provide that service, but I'm biased.
Okay. Thank you. Looks like Harry has a question. Can you talk about the new DFARS clauses, 252.204, 7019, and 7020, and what they mean related to this?
I'm honestly not familiar with those two specific clauses.
Okay.
I think the main clause that applies to this from the DFARS is the 7012.
Okay.
And that's one that I've seen the most reference to. I could certainly do a little bit of research and would be happy to get back with them, but off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Okay. Then I would, Harry Kruckenberg sent that question. So Harry, if you want to go ahead and email Dr. Wagner that specific question, he said he'd be willing to research that for you. Next question. Could you confirm the meaning of CUI?
Well, can I go back to, let me go back here.
Sure.
Let's go back to that.
As Dr. Wagner is looking, again, if there are other questions, if you could go ahead and type those in. I want to make sure that we get your questions answered before we finish. We still have some time.
Okay, so here was a slide that had CUI, controlled unclassified information, and it's sensitive information that the U.S. government says is sensitive information. Now, this information is supposed to be labeled as CUI data or CUI information. From what I've seen, it's not always labeled, but then if there's a question, I would go back to your contractor and ask them, because ultimately they're the ones that should be saying that it is or is not. And then this link here to the National Archives that gives different categories of what's considered CUI, so you might find that helpful. And then referencing DFARS, as I mentioned before, DFARS 252.204-7012 has the what's required to safeguard CUI on their networks. And my understanding is this has also recently been moved to just the regular acquisition regulations, not the defense federal acquisition regulations, but in addition, the federal act, just the FARs.
Okay. Thank you. Looks like the gentleman that asked about that DFARS clause, the DFARS 252.204, he said that I guess those clauses were just released at the end of September.
Okay.
All right, we do have another question. Will there be a new or different requirements with the use of so many more virtual or remote workforces?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know that there will be additional or new other than specifically being able to monitor or manage devices coming into your network that are not under your own control. And that's fundamentally where a lot of the challenges today with so many people working from home and largely using devices that aren't managed, not necessarily managed by the company. And that's a challenge. That's a new challenge for everybody. But I would really give that some thought, especially if you're governed under 800/171 or level 3, because that there's specific controls around devices. So we're going to have to really think about how we map those controls to home users and home systems. So I would hope that, you know, there'll be some clarification around that. I don't know if it'll be new controls, but just the challenge of implementing existing controls in that environment.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additional questions that anyone has? Again, we want to definitely thank Dr. Wagner for that presentation. A lot of information, as you can see, a lot of updates, a lot of changes, and probably continued changes and continual additions as it relates to cybersecurity. So as a small business, if you're doing business with the government, or if you're looking to do business with the government, you definitely want to make sure that you stay on top of these updates. Just a few, again, if there are any other questions, you can type those, but today's webinar, we will continue. We have, I think, 3 more webinars before October is out. So if you'd like to join us for our next webinar on Thursday, it will be on betasam.gov. So if you want to find out about betasam.gov this Thursday at 10 o'clock. And then on Tuesday, the 27th, how to develop an effective capability statement. And if you don't know what a capability statement is, it's like a 1-page resume for your business as it relates to you marketing your company to the government. And if you don't know what that capability statement is, or if you need assistance putting one together, you're in good hands. The PTAC can assist you with that. They can provide templates and help you to review those. And then next Thursday on the 29th, we have marketing to the federal government. So again, you can go to ohiobusinessmatchmaker.com, click on the webinar link, and then register for those webinars. And then again, if you weren't with us at the beginning, the registration for the Ohio Business Matchmaker is now open. It will be virtual this year on November 17th and November 18th. We'd love for you to join us. And the cost is just $35. With that, I believe that is all we have today. I don't see any additional questions. Again, thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope that you will join us for the Matchmaker. We're looking forward to having a wonderful event. I do believe we already have some agencies that are registered that haven't participated in the past. NASA is registered. Again, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is registered. DLA or DFAS, Defense Logistics Agency over on East Broad Street is registered. And I know we'll have agencies from the state of Ohio, cities. We may even have some universities and colleges. So again, once you register, you will get a chance to, like in times past, set up a one-on-one session with a individual from a government agency or organization and have a chance to pitch your capability statements and talk about your goods and services. So with that, we'd just like to thank you for your time today. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy your day. Register for Thursday's webinar. We'll have webinars also in November. And then we look forward to you joining us on November 17th and November 18th for the virtual Matchmaker event. Thank you so much. Everyone saying thank you, Dr. Wagner. wonderful information today, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Good,
Thank you again, Sharon.
Thanks,
Thank you again,
everybody.
Sharon. And everyone have a wonderful day. Today's presentation, if you would like a copy, I believe Sharon had her email up there, hopkins1@ohiouniversity.edu, or you can log on. It will eventually be posted on the Matchmaker site. But if you want those slides, she can email those to you, or you can get them as well as the recording on the Matchmaker site. Again, thank you for your time, and everybody have a great day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.